So welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you were able to make it today. I'm excited to be talking to you about your superpower. I think it's such a fun topic. And I was telling Brooke that I just love the picture of this little girl. I couldn't help myself. She just seemed the perfect cover girl for this session. So I'm glad you're here. And we will, this is a webinar, so it's set up so that I will talk and give you this presentation. And at the end, we'll have time for some questions. Oh, Eva, so you're from an Ursuline college. I am familiar. I'm going to say the name wrong. Is it Brescia? Brescia, I think, but I am familiar, and I love that you're here from there. That's wonderful. So we don't want to hold you up. Some of you might be on your lunch break, and we should go ahead and get started. So Brooke, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Ursuline and the Institute.
Sure. I'm so glad everyone's able to join us today. This webinar is being presented by the Institute for Women, Wellness, and Work at Ursuline College. And I am so excited to be able to introduce our presenter today, which is Dr. Gina Messina. She is an author, educator, and thought leader. She's well recognized as an expert practitioner. She has an international platform and has spoken at universities, organizations, and conferences. She has also presented at the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations on women multiple occasions, and is in the national news circuit with appearances on MSNBC, PBS, NPR, and Sirius XM radio. She has been welcomed to the TEDx stage and has been featured in the Washington Post, HuffPost, the Associated Press, and the Boston Globe, among others. She has written for the Huffington Post and is the author or editor of 5 books, including the highly acclaimed Faithfully Feminist. Her publications, Women, Religion, Revolution, and Rape, Culture, and Spiritual Violence, were named in the top 100 books on women's spirituality. She is also co-founder of feminismandreligion.com, and she's read in 181 countries and recently ranked number 7 in the top 50 news and blogging sites on religion. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Gina.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Brooke. It's always uncomfortable sitting through your own introduction. Yes. So anyways, I'm grateful that you all are here, and I love this topic. I actually had been thinking a lot about this and saw an article that said that today, when you do a job interview, interviewers are getting more creative with their questioning. And one of the questions they ask is what your superpower is. And I thought that was so fascinating. And I think for a lot of us, talking about our superpower, first of all, we may not have even thought about it. And second of all, we often have a lot of work to do around ourselves so that we're willing to admit, and not just admit, acknowledge that we have a superpower and own that and really use it to the best of our ability. So I wanted to start off just talking a little bit about what does it mean? What does this mean? What does it mean to have a superpower? And so to know what your superpower is, you have to know yourself, and you have to be willing to actualize those things that are really critical to you, to be your authentic self, to recognize what it means to be your authentic self, and to put that into action. So what I want to talk about today starts off with acknowledging a little bit about what imposter syndrome is, and discussing why it is really important for us to be asking this question to ourselves. So if we ask ourselves like what our superpower is, a lot of us are going to feel like, what exactly does that mean? And how can I put it in context? So asking the question really gives us the opportunity to think about what our strengths are. How can we identify those? How can we know what they are? And how can we really leverage those for ourselves? It's also about acknowledging our own value, which sometimes can be uncomfortable, just like it was uncomfortable for me to hear my introduction, right? And especially for women, we're often in a position where, we are raised to be humble, to be kind, to be passive. And some of that is probably changing in our society today. And I still think about, my own upbringing starting back in the 70s, which certainly has played into my own identity, and I think has for a lot of us. So being able to acknowledge our value and really embrace who we are at our core and be able to express that. So asking ourselves this question is a really important window for us to get to know ourselves better and really appreciate who we are and how we show up in the world. So I'm always talking about this idea that we need to break up with our imposter monster. If we really want to know what our superpower is, if we really want to be able to acknowledge our value and show up in the world as our authentic selves, we have to acknowledge the role that imposter syndrome plays in our lives. And if you haven't heard that term before, imposter syndrome is really that nagging voice that's in our heads that tells us, you're not good enough, or you don't belong here, or you're a fraud. We've all had it from time to time, and it's really normal for us to experience that sometimes. But when it's a constant voice in our heads, that's a big problem. And that's something that we need to be addressing. We've all had that experience. I always share, when I got to grad school, I was certain on my first day of class that someone was going to show up and tap me on the shoulder and tell me I was in the wrong place, or that they sent me an acceptance letter by mistake, right? Of course, I earned my place, but I had that nagging voice that kept saying, like, do I really belong here? Did I really earn this? Am I smart enough? Am I good enough? And it's those voices that really nag at us, that leave us in a position to question our value and to really struggle with acknowledging what our strengths are, and how we can be our authentic selves in the world. So thinking about, what is that negative voice in your head? How can you identify it? How can you really pay attention to it and recognize when it shows up and respond to it? Part of that is, our ability to be rational. Would a top university really send out an acceptance letter mistakenly? I guess it could happen, right? I guess it could happen, but likely not, right? So when we're telling ourselves this negative story, we need to take a step back and think about, this is my imposter monster, and it's time for us to break up. What's the real story? How can I correct that for myself? And how can I reword this to say, okay, I'm here, I've made it, I'm in this classroom, and now it's time for me to prove myself moving forward, right? How can we reshape the conversation for ourselves so that we can acknowledge what we have earned and how we got there? So think about those moments, and when they pop up, don't be afraid to address them and, reword that conversation for yourself. So I have this quote here because I think it's so powerful. I think many of us are Maya Angelou fans. She's just brilliant and amazing. And I saw this quote from her, and I think it's one we can all relate to. I mean, she's so brilliant. I've written 11 books, but each time I think, they're going to find me out. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. Right. So after publishing 11 books, she still had that imposter monster in her ear telling her this story. And yet, the world looks to Maya Angelou for her incredible brilliance to inspire us. So if Maya Angelou can have imposter syndrome, clearly we all can. And knowing that if someone this amazing could be dealing with it, clearly the story that you're telling yourself, those negative thoughts are something that needs to be interrupted. So the next thing I really want to talk about, in order to break up with this imposter monster and work through understanding your strengths and who you are at your core, you really need to build up your self-awareness. This is such a critical skill. It's foundational for us. And self-awareness is really being able to understand, what do we do well? What are our areas for growth? We all have areas for growth. I don't like to talk about weaknesses. Um, we all have areas for growth. Get rid of the negative language. What are your values? What's important to you? What do you see as your purpose? And that's such a big question for us. Something that I have found really helpful is writing a mission statement for yourself. And maybe that's a workshop we can do coming up in the future, is thinking about how to write your own mission statement. I try to wake up every day and tell myself what my mission statement is and how the work that I am doing relates to my purpose. And this is really important. It's something that I value, and it's why I engage in it, right? If we can have that kind of statement for ourselves, and we can wake up every day and remind ourselves, starting our day off with our mission, it connects to everything we do throughout our day, and it brings together our values and our purpose and our strengths for the work that we're doing. And it's such an incredible message for us to give ourselves. But being self-aware, of course, allows us to recognize internally these things about ourselves, but it also helps us to think about how we're perceived by others. So being connected to that social awareness, being connected to the ways that people may perceive your words or your actions, is really important, because if you're disconnected with that, then those relationships you're seeking to engage in, the message you're seeking to communicate isn't always going to come across. So I always share this jokingly, but also somewhat seriously, is that I'm Sicilian, and I come from a very culturally Sicilian family. I'm a first generation American, and my family itself, we can be very loud. Kind of like the Cake Boss family. I always say, if like you watch the Cake Boss, that's my family. That's how we are. Very loving, but very loud. And I find that sometimes when I am like that people think that I'm yelling. And I'm like, I'm not yelling. I just talk loud, right? But it's not a good quality to share outside of my, family, where we're used to that. If I start talking that way, like to say Brooke, she's going to be like, what's going on here, right? So being aware of the way that I show up with different people in different relationships is really important. That's a part of self-awareness, and being able to hone in on that will really help you, again, appreciate who you are, recognize who you are at your core, what your values are, what your strengths are, and also the ways that you're being perceived, so you can connect with people in the right way and live out the mission that's important to you. So next, this idea of actualizing, to self-actualize, is so critical. We can have all the knowledge in the world. Knowledge is so important, but if you don't put it into action, it doesn't really matter much. I always joke about the sleep expert. The sleep expert knows everything there is to know about sleep and why it's important, and yet that sleep expert doesn't sleep because they're up all night watching other people sleep. So that's no good, right? That expert has all this knowledge and yet isn't taking care of him or herself. So knowing about yourself and being aware and understanding the way you're perceived is really important. But then you need to take that information and put it into action. And what that means is that you are willing to grow, that you're willing to pursue those things that are really important to you, and that you're willing to acknowledge your values and your purpose and how that comes together, so that you can lead a life where you feel like you're really flourishing. The word happy is a very interesting word because I think we all define it differently. But what does it mean for you to be happy? What does it mean for you to flourish? How can you put that into action through knowing yourself, interrupting that negative self-talk, leaving behind the imposter monster, and embracing your values, acknowledging who you are at your core, and really carrying that into the world? So, in saying all of that, I mentioned that I had read this article about the job interview, and I thought it was so interesting. So I quoted the article here in the bottom, and I will send out some resources to you later this week that will have a playback of this session, and also some additional information and resources for you to look through, that you can access this article in, and maybe spend a little more time looking at these. But what does your superpower mean? Now, I don't think you're actually going to say my superpower is X-ray vision, right? But if you were answering the question in an interview, these were some of the answers that could be given and what they meant. And I thought it was really fascinating that we can really put these kinds of things into context. And the idea that X-ray vision is really wanting to be able to analyze situations before you make a decision, right? And really be attentive. Like this idea that flying is about taking risks, and mind reading is about wanting to be emotionally intelligent. So some of these I felt like, well, there might be some boundary issues here, but I appreciated the context and how they drew this out, and I thought it would be a fun thing to share. But I'm going to leave this list up for a moment, and I'm going to ask you to just take a second, and if you would, in thinking about who you are, what it means to acknowledge your own strengths and your own values and where you find purpose, um, and how you carry that into the world. If you wouldn't mind posting in the chat, and if you're uncomfortable, just write it down on the piece of paper. But what do you think your superpower is? Are you willing to share? I'm watching the chat. I don't see anything yet, but that's okay. Write it down for yourself if you don't want to share. Shape shifting. I love this. I would love to hear more of what that means. Do you mind adding a little description in the chat of what shape shifting means? So while Kim is sharing, oh, we see empathy and being adaptive. Those are great superpowers. I like to talk about my own superpower as being definitely empathetic, and compassionate. Those are elements that I get feedback on a lot through my student evaluations. And so a great way to learn more about our strengths and to be more self-aware, and also to recognize where we have areas to grow, is to ask others for feedback. I'm in a unique position that I get feedback every semester, and I've learned a lot about my strengths from that. I've also learned a lot about my areas for growth, which is, being more timely with my email responses. And that is something like I need to own, right? I need to own that. But there's also areas where I could grow that I choose not to grow. So that's something else I want to point out, that none of us is good at everything. None of us has to be good at everything. and you get to choose where you want to grow. So, one of our colleagues, Julie Jones, is an athlete and a coach and just a superstar. And I am in awe of her. And I am not an athlete. I trip over my own 2 feet quite often. And I have no desire to be an athlete. That is not an area I'm going to choose to grow in, right? So, knowing that for yourself is also really important. So, shape shifting, Kim says it's when she works with two different sides of a company. So I go between the two responsibilities every hour of the day while she's working with two different companies. That's really, really fascinating and an amazing superpower to have, and takes incredible organization and discipline, and is one that I think many of us would like to learn. So thank you so much to those of you who chose to share. That's really, really outstanding. I'm going to go ahead and move on and talk a little bit about what it means to own it. I love this idea of owning it. Own who you are, own your value, appreciate yourself. And in order to get there, we have to break down some myths, right? And be willing to acknowledge some things. So, perfection is a myth. 100%. There's no such thing as perfection. I want to believe there's perfection, but there isn't. And a lot of times we get wrapped up in trying to make something perfect, and we end up wasting a lot of time and energy, and not giving ourselves credit for the work that we have done. So I used to say, done is better than perfect, because there's no such thing as perfect. And I've changed my quote to progress is better than perfect, because sometimes done isn't the best end result, right? To just be done. And I had to rework that for myself. So what does progress look like for you? That's something we should all be asking ourselves, and letting us see the value that we're contributing, while acknowledging perfection isn't a thing. And what I've done here is really good. So I'm going to move forward with it. Also, that having a superpower doesn't mean that you're superwoman. I joke with colleagues like, you are such a superwoman, and we are all superwomen in a way. But again, there's no such thing as perfect, and you can't do it all. There's that saying that we've seen on necklaces and bracelets and in memes, that is, she believed she could, so she did. And I love that. But I also love even more, she believed she could, but she was tired. So she put her feet up and took a nap and tried again the next day, right? And we need to give ourselves permission for that, because, we do and do and do. And at some point, we have to give ourselves a break and acknowledge all that we have contributed, and that we are allowed to take time to take care of ourselves. And thinking about what that means to take care of yourself is also really critical, because we often talk about self-care as drinking enough water, eating your broccoli, getting enough sleep. Those are really important things. But I think about those things as self-maintenance, right? It's like, yes, we need to maintain our bodies. We need to do these things so we are running well, if you will, so that our bodies are working well. But what does it mean to actually take care of yourself? For me, hot Krispy Kreme donut all the way. Not something I can do all the time, but once in a while, it's what I need. It makes me feel better, right? That's not an everyday thing, obviously, but what can you do every day to take care of yourself? Is it a 5-minute meditation? Maybe it's your alone time in the shower. Maybe it is, binge watching your guilty pleasure, like watching watching a couple episodes. We can't binge watch every day, but maybe once a week, right? So what is it that you do to take care of yourself? How are you maintaining yourself, right? But also giving yourself permission to do what you need in the moment. That is Really, really something that we all need to be thinking about. Also, stop comparing yourself to people on Facebook, because there's no such thing as a real Facebook life, right? Nobody posts the bad, well, some people post some bad things that happen to them on Facebook, right? I won't say that nobody posts nothing. We occasionally see a Facebook train wreck going on, but generally speaking, we look at people's lives and we think they have this amazing life where their kids are always dressed perfectly and clean and say please and thank you. That is not my life. That is not my child, right? Behind the scenes, our kids are all, doing their own thing, and that's okay. They're being kids. We're not all perfect all the time. And again, there's no such thing as perfect. We like to put this portrayal out there. Be yourself. Think about who you are now compared to who you were 5 years ago. Think about the progress that you've made. That's a reasonable comparison to make, rather than looking to somebody on Facebook or a colleague who sits next to you. We don't know all the details of anyone else's lives. We only know the details of our own. So don't make unreasonable comparisons, because it just makes us feel bad about ourselves. And we're comparing ourselves to something that is unrealistic. It's just not real. So think about that. Think about who you were even a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Where have you moved throughout your life? Where are the areas that you've really grown in? What new things have you discovered about yourself? Bob Dylan has this great quote. I'm a big Bob Dylan fan, and he says, I don't know why people are always talking about finding ourselves. We're not lost. We create ourselves. And I thought that is such an important statement, because we do. We have the ability to make decisions every day about who we are, who we want to be, and how we want to show up in the world. So really think about that, and think about how you've honored that over time, and what you want to continue to create as the time moves forward. And finally, be kind to yourself, right? Think about the ways that you treat people in your life and grant yourself that same grace. That's so important. Um, and acknowledge when some people in our lives are not very nice to us, like our kids, when they get grounded, or they're mad that you don't have their favorite cereal or whatever it is. And know that they love you, and that you're going to be kind to yourself when they are not, right? Make that decision to treat yourself the way you would treat your best friend. Think about those that show up around you and for you, and what they share with you, and recognize that those are important insights about who you are, that you can really appreciate about yourself and embrace, and carry that with you forward. So I think those are really important things to be considering about how you can own it, how you can acknowledge your worth, your values, your purpose, and all that you're doing, to become more self-aware, to really think about how you can self-actualize and acknowledge what your superpower is, find it, own it, and live it out into the world. So I am gonna leave it there. I have this screen up for you in case you haven't been able to see our Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. If you're on social media and you want to connect, please do. Our email address is here also. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us. And I always love connecting with new people. So I didn't have my own information up here because I wanted to share our Institute info, but you can always connect with me through the Institute's email, and I can shoot you my email address and connect with me on social. I'd love to hear from you, but let's open it up for questions. let's see. So we have, thank you for the comment. Instagram is worse for artificial lives than Facebook, in my humble opinion. I appreciate that very much. March 2020 to now has almost been a vacuum for me. I think so many of us really, really understand that feeling. And I think considering the ways that um, we've all been challenged over this last year and a half or so. I think that it's led to a lot of struggles around depression, feeling really disconnected, and also maybe some real deep insight about what's really important to us and maybe where we can be giving more attention. Um, and one of the things I've really been thinking a lot about is Parker Palmer had this meditation around wintertime. And I know we're not in wintertime, we're in summertime, but I think COVID really fits into this idea that, he says when it's wintertime, it's bare, everything, there's no growth. It feels like it's cold, it gets dark early. There's a lot of darkness around us, and it's uncomfortable and we don't like it. And but we can also think about it as a time where the bareness really opens up so many things to us to see that we can't see when there's so many beautiful blooms and everything around that we love to look at. It covers up things that we might not be able to recognize otherwise. And I think that's a really lovely idea, in a way for us to think about some of those time periods that are really dark for us, and how we might be able to look at those as a time of learning and also a time of rest. Because generally, I mean, especially in American culture, we're on the go all the time. So giving ourselves time to rest and really ponder some important questions and think about where we want to be open to seeing new things and have some new insights is a way that we can kind of shift our thinking on it a little bit. And looking forward, for so many of us, this is a stressful time in thinking about, are you going back to the office? Is there childcare available? Are you ready to go back to the office? I mean, there's so many reports on the mental health struggles that so many of us are having, and thinking about disrupting our lives again. It's like we just got settled into a routine. So what does that look like for us, and what can we do to make sure we're in a good place? Those are important questions we should be thinking about and asking for help. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Barb, for that lovely, lovely comment. She said, thank you so much. What a breath of fresh air. Do we have other questions or comments you'd like to share with the group? Feel free to jump in on the chat. Okay, well, we can wrap this up a little bit early. We always want to leave enough time for everyone to participate and share your questions and your comments. But I just want to say how grateful I am that you took the time to be here with us during your lunch hour this afternoon. And thank you for sharing your comments. Really fantastic to hear from you, and stay tuned. We'll be sending this replay out to you. We'll also be sharing some additional resources, and consider checking out on our website. We have many more, we're calling them power learning sessions coming up, these free sessions for you to engage on your lunch hour, just to jump in and engage in some new ideas, and also some master classes, and even some intensive weekend learning experiences and retreats. We'd love to see you. We'd love to be a resource for you. We have some great articles on the website, videos, the podcast, which, by the way, one of our recent podcast episodes with Allison Jimenez, she talks about imposter syndrome and overcoming that. So that might be something you want to listen to. So I see Eva, I believe, raised your hand. Feel free to jump in on the chat. You might just be saying thank you. I see your thank you message. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And again, if anything else comes up and you want a direct connection, shoot an email over, and we would love to connect. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.